Buenos días, señores, o buenas noches, buenas tardes, lo que sea. Hoy tenemos que hablar del pretérito y el imperfecto. Esto es un tema muy importante para cualquier estudiante de español. El pretérito y el imperfecto son dos tiempos simples del pasado en español. Son los dos tiempos simples del pasado que tenemos. Y el pretérito se usa a veces y a veces el imperfecto se usa. Y lo importante es saber y aprender cuándo se usa el pretérito y cuándo se usa el imperfecto. Es algo que ya hemos estudiado, ya estudiamos un poco el pretérito solo y el imperfecto solo, pero hoy vamos a ver el pretérito y el imperfecto juntos para ver y saber cuándo se usa uno y cuándo se usa el otro. ¿Vale? Os lo digo en inglés. Welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing the preterite and the imperfect. This is an extremely important topic for any student that's learning Spanish. The preterite and the imperfect, as you'll remember from our previous studies, are the two simple past tenses that we have in Spanish. And we've already seen when we use the preterite and when we use the imperfect, but today we're going to be looking a little bit more in depth at the ways in which they play when we see them together. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got. First thing I want you to focus on is these little drawings that I've made here. You'll find this one at least in your book. You'll notice it's just a wavy line with a line crossing through it. Okay, so we've got a line crossing through and we've got a wavy line. This is going to demonstrate one of the differences between the preterite and the imperfect and one of the ways in which they work together. The wavy line here is intended to represent the imperfect tense. And this is showing, as we'll see in a minute when we look at the list, but the idea that the imperfect tense is often used to describe ongoing actions in the past with no real reference to their beginning or their end. And so this is, for instance, statements such as, I was eating, I was drinking, we were walking down the street, this sort of thing. So that's what this demonstrates here. So anytime we've got an ongoing action in the past with no clear reference to a beginning or an end, that's our imperfect. This straight line here is intended to represent the preterite and the idea of a completed action, right? An action that the speaker views as whole and completed. Obviously, everything we're talking about here is in the past, and so everything's a completed action. But we make a distinction between the idea of an ongoing action with no clear reference to beginning or end, and this idea of a complete and whole action, such as, I ate the pizza, I called you, I drank the soda, I studied for the test, I went to school. These are actions that the speaker views as completed, as opposed to I was studying, and that sort of ongoing action. So that's one good way to remember and to sort of visualize some of the differences between the preterite and the imperfect. I also like to draw this drawing. Hopefully it's coming out nice and clear for you. But if you'll notice, basically we've got what sort of looks like a fish here. Right? We've got sort of the bones of the fish. What this one demonstrates, this straight line going forward would be our preterite. This is, think of completed actions as the actions that are driving the story forward through time. And so if I'm saying things like, I went home, I ate dinner, I went to sleep, I woke up, I brushed my teeth, I went to school. All of these completed actions are pushing that story forward. They're really the things that are happening in the story. One of the functions of the imperfect is going to be to sort of flesh out that story, right? Sort of like the bones in a fish, okay? So all of these little bones coming off would represent all of the other details in the story. Things that will describe elements of the story, things that will describe people's physical, emotional, psychological states, to sort of give a bit of background to the story. One of the things we say is setting the scene. And so the preterite here is pushing the story forward, saying I ate, I drank, I swam, I danced. And along here we have, for instance, it was cold outside, I was hungry, they were tired, we were talking. Okay, so the things that sort of flesh out that story and give some of that background and set the scene a bit, that's our imperfect. So think about those two drawings, they should help, because this is something, preterite and the imperfect, a lot of times, I couldn't just give you a sentence on a test that just had, for instance, a blank and then said pisa, right? And asked you to choose between the preterite or the imperfect of the verb comer. Because if I were to say comí pizza in the preterite, that would mean I ate pizza. And if I were to say comía pizza in the imperfect, that would mean I was eating pizza, or I used to eat pizza, or I would eat pizza. So it's really important to notice that here we're finally entering real territory of creativity and sort of conceptual items in Spanish. It's no longer just memorize this and do this. At this point, there are a lot of right answers in real life, and it's important to know the ways in which these different right answers convey different meanings. So let's look at some of the uses of the preterite and the imperfect. Starting with the preterite, as I've said, the idea of completed actions. Once again, this is all in the past that we're talking about, so everything's over, right? But what we're talking about here with the idea of completed actions is actions that are viewed as 100% complete. I ate, I drank, I swam, right? We're not seeing them as something ongoing. Also, conditions or states viewed as a whole. So you're going to see in a moment, oftentimes, descriptions of emotions and feelings and that sort of thing will often be the imperfect. But if we view it as completely whole, if it's limited, then we can explain this in the preterite. So for instance, if I want to say, I was tired all day, or I was sad for 3 minutes. Okay? This sort of thing where we're viewing it as complete, then we can do it in the preterite. So, condition or state viewed as a whole. Oftentimes in the preterite, we're going to see a specific time limit on something. So if you see por 3 horas, for 3 hours, or por 3 años, for 3 years, if we're limiting it like that, then we can express in the preterite. So it's not that the preterite is a short time and the imperfect is a long time, because I can say, for instance, dinosaurs were on the earth for 3 million years, and if I'm putting this limit on it, then I'm going to use the preterite. So los dinosaurios estuvieron aquí por 3,000 años, 3 millones de años, perdón. So we're seeing it as a whole, a completed whole there. The imperfect, on the other hand, we're going to be discussing things that are in the process of happening. Okay, this is this idea of the ongoing actions that were expressed here. So I was eating, I was drinking, I was studying, I was swimming, that sort of thing. Repeated or habitual actions will be in the imperfect. So every day I would go to the store, or I used to always eat pizza, or we would often study together in the library. These idea of habitual or repeated actions will be in the imperfect. When we discuss physical, emotional, what did I do here? Physical, psychological, or emotional state. Physical, mental, or emotional state, I guess we could say. Right? Psychological would also work there. We're going to be using the imperfect to discuss those. So, I was really sad. Right? I was exhausted. They were happy. Physical, emotional, mental state. Time and age will be in the imperfect. So, I was 15 years old, or they were young, or she was 70 years old. These times and age. Also time, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. This will always be in the imperfect. Indirect discourse. This is one to pay attention to. Perhaps not as obvious as some of the others, but it's something we do very similarly in English. Indirect discourse meaning, if somebody told you something, okay, the something will often be in the imperfect. For example, if I come to you and I say, it's raining outside. In the present tense, I'm just telling you it is raining outside. And later on today, you're telling someone, oh, the teacher told me that it was raining outside. The teacher told me that it was raining outside. The was raining outside part would be in the imperfect. Or if I say, if your parent tells you, you need to clean your room, and later you're telling a friend, my father told me that I needed to clean my room, the needed to clean my room part, that indirect discourse part, where you're sort of quoting someone but not actually quoting them, that would be in the imperfect. And finally, this idea of setting the stage, which goes along with a lot of these. Well, it goes along specifically with physical, emotional, mental state, but also just setting the stage in general. If I want to say, the house was red, the cows were white and black, the classroom was large. These descriptions of things in the past that we don't view as completed actions, but that we view as just this setting the stage sort of idea, we'll use the imperfect for that. Okay? Let's look at a few examples, and then it's really important that you go and practice this. This is one, like some of the other things we've done, that really requires a bunch of practice, really requires you to just sort of jump in and do some of the work, because only in that way will this start to become clearer. So, let's look at an example here. Hopefully the glare is not too fierce. Okay, we got some examples. Cuando yo, blank, niño. I hope you can read that, but it says niño. Cuando yo, blank, niño, and we want a form of the verb ser. Siempre, blank, and we want the verb comer, hamburguesas. Una vez, blank, comer un perro caliente, cuando blank, tener 15 años. Mi padre me, blank, decir que los perros calientes, blank, buenos. Después, blank, with the verb ir a la escuela, y blank, estudiar por 3 horas. Take a minute, pause the video, try it out for yourself. I'll step aside so you can read it completely, and then we'll look at it. Okay, so hopefully you've done this by now. Looking at this. This first one should be era. Cuando yo era niño. Okay, we can think about this as time and age, right? We're also sort of setting the scene. Siempre comía hamburguesas. Once again, the imperfect, because here we're talking about a repeated or habitual action. Una vez comí un perro caliente. Here when I say one time, I ate a hot dog. And so we're looking at this as a completed action. Una vez comí un perro caliente cuando tenía 15 años. Once again, we have the age here, when I was 15 years old. Mi padre me dijo, so my father told me, it's just a completed action that he told me something, que los perros calientes eran buenos. Okay, here we're looking at indirect discourse, as well as, you could say, sort of setting the stage, this description. Después, fui a la escuela, just a completed action. Then I went to the school, y estudié por 3 horas. Again, a completed action, and the way that we know that is that we've limited it to this 3-hour time period. Okay, go ahead, do the homework as well for this section. Check out some of the extra practice, and get back in touch if you need some more. Venga, vale, adiós, gracias.